The wind, a relentless sculptor of the high desert, worried at the edges of the tarp covering the old pickup truck, a sound that had become as familiar to Elias Vance as his own heartbeat. Dust devils danced on the horizon, miniature tornadoes against the bruised purple of a coming storm. He sat on the porch of the dilapidated house, its paint peeling like sun-scorched skin, a chipped enamel mug cradled in his calloused hands. Beside him, Ghost, his German shepherd, lay with his chin resting on his paws, his gray and white fur blending into the weathered wood. Ghost's eyes, intelligent and watchful, scanned the vast, empty expanse of the New Mexico wilderness, a silent sentinel against the encroaching silence. Elias had spent his last $750 on this place, a gamble against a stacked deck. A ramshackle structure with a leaking roof, no running water, and electricity that flickered more than it shone. But it was theirs, his and Lily's, and Ghost's. After Afghanistan, after the noise and the endless, grinding fear, this quiet desolation was a balm, a rough poultice on a wound that refused to close. Lily, only 7, was inside, sketching in a worn notebook, her laughter a fragile counterpoint to the wind's mournful song. He'd promised her a fresh start, a place where the shadows wouldn't loom so large, where the ghosts of his past wouldn't whisper quite so loudly. He'd failed to mention the plumbing issues or the fact that their nearest neighbor was a good 20 miles away. Ghost nudged his hand with his wet nose, a low rumble in his chest. Elias scratched behind the dog's ears, feeling the coarse fur beneath his fingers. "Just the wind, boy," he murmured, though a prickle of unease had already started to crawl up his spine. Ghost wasn't easily spooked. He'd faced down insurgents in Kandahar, held the line against mortar fire, and never once flinched. But now, his ears were perked, his gaze fixed on a stand of ancient, twisted junipers at the edge of their property line. A faint, almost imperceptible scent seemed to be drawing him, a whisper on the wind that only he could hear. Elias stood, his joints protesting with a familiar stiffness. He was still a young man, barely 40, but the years of carrying a pack and the weight of unspoken grief had etched lines around his eyes and in the set of his jaw. He followed Ghost, the dog moving with a silent grace, his nose working the air. The junipers were gnarled and old, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. The ground beneath them was a carpet of needles and dry leaves, crackling under Elias's worn boots. Ghost stopped, his body tensing, a low growl rumbling in his throat. He began to paw at the earth, his powerful forelegs digging with a surprising ferocity. "What is it, boy?" Elias knelt, pushing aside the loose soil Ghost had disturbed. Beneath a tangle of roots and rock, something glinted. Not silver, not gold, but a dull, metallic sheen, dark with age and corrosion. He dug with his hands, the sharp edges of rock tearing at his skin, ignoring the sting. He pulled it free, a heavy, rectangular box, its surface pitted and scarred. It had no obvious lock, just a series of intricate latches, stiff with rust. Ghost sat back on his haunches, watching him, his tail thumping a soft rhythm against the earth, his earlier agitation replaced by a quiet intensity. Elias felt a sudden, inexplicable thrill, a jolt of something akin to discovery, an echo of the adrenaline that had once defined his life. He looked at the box, then at Ghost, a silent question passing between them. The dog simply stared back, his intelligent eyes reflecting the deepening twilight, as if he knew, somehow, that this was only the beginning. He knew that this rusted metal container, unearthed in the desolate landscape, was a harbinger, a turning point. And as the first fat drops of rain began to fall, signaling the storm's imminent arrival, Elias knew it too. This abandoned house, bought on a whim and a prayer, was about to reveal its secrets, and their quiet, isolated life was about to be irrevocably changed. The box was heavier than it looked, its weight a solid, undeniable presence in Elias's hands. Back on the porch, the wind whipped around them, carrying the scent of rain and damp earth. Lily, drawn by the commotion and the sudden change in the weather, appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide with curiosity. "What's that, Daddy?" she asked, her voice a small, clear bell in the gathering gloom. Elias held up the box, its dark surface reflecting the last vestiges of daylight. Ghost found it. he said, a hint of wonder in his voice. Lily's eyes grew even wider as she looked at Ghost, then back at the box. The dog, sensing her excitement, gave a soft whine and nudged her hand. He worked at the latches, their mechanisms stiff and reluctant. Finally, with a grunt of effort, the last one gave way. The lid creaked open, revealing not treasure, but a carefully organized collection of old documents, their edges yellowed and brittle. A faint, musty smell rose from within, a scent of forgotten history. Elias carefully lifted the top layer. Beneath it, nestled in a bed of faded velvet, was a tarnished silver locket, intricate and delicate, and a single, dog-eared photograph. The photo showed a young woman, her smile radiant, holding a small, scruffy terrier. Her eyes, even in the faded image, held a familiar spark of defiance and kindness. He picked up the locket first, its weight surprisingly light. He pressed the clasp, and it sprang open to reveal two tiny, sepia-toned portraits, the same young woman, and a stern-faced man in a military uniform. Below the photo, etched into the velvet lining, was a date. 1942. Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. This wasn't just an old box. It was a time capsule, a whisper from the past. He carefully set the locket aside and picked up the documents. They were handwritten letters, dated from the early 1940s, addressed to my dearest Evelyn. The handwriting was elegant, almost artistic, and the paper felt impossibly fragile in his hands. He read the first few lines, his brow furrowing. The letters spoke of love, longing, and the looming shadow of war. They were from a soldier, riding home from the European front. Ghost, ever watchful, sat patiently beside him, his head cocked, as if listening to the silent stories unfolding from the pages. Lily, sensing the gravity of the moment, had quieted, her usual boisterous energy subdued. She sat cross-legged on the floor, watching her father, her gaze occasionally drifting to the locket and the photograph. Elias continued to read, each letter a fragment of a life, a testament to hope and fear in a time of global upheaval. The letters spoke of a small town, a place called Oakhaven, not far from their own desolate stretch of land. They mentioned a local mill, a community torn by wartime anxieties, and a secret, a burden that Evelyn carried, hinted at but never fully revealed. As he delved deeper, a strange feeling began to settle over him. It was more than just curiosity. It was a sense of responsibility, a feeling that these stories, these lives, had been entrusted to him. The names, the places, the events, though decades removed, resonated with a faint familiarity, like echoes in a distant canyon. He saw glimpses of a community struggling, much like his own, to find peace amidst the chaos. The soldiers' letters were filled with a poignant blend of hope for reunion and a growing despair over the war's brutality. Evelyn's replies, though not present, could be felt in the soldiers' wistful responses, in his desperate pleas for her to stay safe, to keep their secret. He spent the next few hours immersed in the past, the world outside fading into the background. The storm had broken, the rain lashing against the windows, a rhythmic drumming that underscored the quiet drama unfolding on the porch. Lily, eventually succumbing to sleep, curled up on an old blanket, her breathing soft and even. Ghost remained vigilant, his presence a comforting anchor in the swirling currents of Elias's thoughts. The last letter he read was dated 1945. It was terse, almost frantic, speaking of a final mission, a desperate hope for peace, and a chilling premonition of danger. It ended abruptly, mid-sentence, the ink smudged as if the writer had been interrupted, or worse. Elias closed the box, the weight of its contents pressing down on him. He looked at the faded photograph of Evelyn, her smile frozen in time, and knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that their journey in this quiet, forgotten place had just begun. He had found not just a box of old letters, but a mystery, a connection to a past that felt strangely intertwined with his own present. And as the storm raged outside, washing the desert clean, Elias knew that the answers he sought, and perhaps the healing his own soul craved, lay hidden somewhere in the echoes of Evelyn's secret. He felt a profound shift, a quiet stirring of purpose that had been dormant since his return from the war. This wasn't just a house. It was a repository of forgotten stories, and Elias, with Ghost by his side, was destined to be their keeper, their unraveler. The next morning, the desert air was scrubbed clean, the sky an impossibly brilliant blue. The world felt new, pristine, as if the storm had washed away not just the dust but the lingering anxieties of the night. Elias woke with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He brewed strong coffee, the aroma filling the small, sparsely furnished kitchen, and watched Lily eat her cereal, her bright eyes reflecting the morning sun. Ghost lay patiently by the door, occasionally nudging Elias's hand with his nose, a silent reminder of the previous night's discovery. Elias spread the documents on the rough-hewn table, the letters and the single photograph laid out like pieces of a puzzle. He focused on the names, the dates, the subtle geographical clues embedded in the soldier's heartfelt prose. Oakhaven, the mill, a specific creek mentioned in one of the letters, a place where Evelyn and her soldier lover had apparently met. He pulled out a worn road map of New Mexico, tracing lines with his finger, searching for Oakhaven. It wasn't on the modern map. Many small towns, born of mining booms or railroad junctions, had faded back into the dust of the desert, leaving only ghosts and forgotten foundations. "What are you looking at, Daddy?" Lily asked, peering over his shoulder, her finger pointing at the faded photograph of Evelyn. She looked sad. Elias looked at the picture, then at his daughter. "She was waiting for someone," he said, a quiet ache in his own chest. He knew that feeling, the endless, agonizing wait, the hope that slowly bled into despair. Lily nodded, her small face serious. "Did he come home?" she asked. Elias hesitated. "I don't know, sweetie, but I'm going to try and find out." Ghost let out a soft whine, his ears perked. He nudged Elias's hand, then turned his head towards the window, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. Elias followed his gaze, seeing nothing but the endless expanse of the desert, shimmering in the heat. But Ghost's intuition was rarely wrong. It was a silent conversation, a language forged in the crucible of war, where unspoken cues could mean the difference between life and death. Elias reached for his binoculars, a relic from his military days, and scanned the distant landscape. Nothing. Just the heat haze, the skeletal forms of cacti, and the endless, indifferent sky. He spent the morning researching online, using the limited satellite internet connection they had. Old maps, historical society archives, local newspapers from the 1940s. He found fragmented references to Oakhaven, a thriving mill town in the 30s and 40s, its prosperity tied to a lucrative timber contract. Then, a sudden, mysterious decline in the early 50s. A few articles hinted at environmental concerns, a strange illness that swept through the community, and then, silence. It was as if the town had simply vanished, swallowed by the desert. He found a digitized copy of an old Oakhaven newspaper, dated just weeks after the last letter in the box. A small, unassuming article on page 3 caught his eye. Local woman, Evelyn Thompson. Missing. The description matched the woman in the photograph. The article mentioned no foul play, only that she had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind an abandoned home and a community perplexed. Elias's gut tightened. Missing. Not dead, not found, just gone. And the soldier? No mention of his return. The pieces were starting to form a disturbing pattern, a quiet tragedy hidden beneath layers of time and dust. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery hues, Elias decided he would go to Oakhaven, not just to satisfy his curiosity, but because Evelyn's story, the soldier's story, deserved an ending, a resolution. He felt a pull, a silent summons from the past, echoing the unspoken promises he'd made to Lily about their own fresh start. He packed a small bag, water, and his old military-issue compass. He would leave at dawn. Lily, sensing his quiet resolve, simply hugged him tightly. "Be careful, Daddy," she whispered. Ghost, as always, was already by the truck, his tail wagging with a quiet anticipation. He knew. He always knew. The desert held its secrets close, but sometimes, with a loyal companion by your side, the whispers of the past could finally break through the silence. And Elias knew, deep in his bones, that this journey was not just about Evelyn, but about finding a way to heal his own fractured spirit, to finally lay his own ghosts to rest. The journey to Oakhaven was a slow, deliberate crawl over unpaved roads and barely discernible tracks, a testament to the desert's relentless reclamation. Elias drove his old pickup, the dust churning in his wake, Ghost riding shotgun, his head out the window, sniffing the air, his senses on high alert. Lily was safely with a distant, elderly neighbor, a kind woman named Maria who lived off the grid and traded stories for fresh produce. The landscape grew increasingly stark, the mesas rising like ancient sentinels, their surfaces carved by millennia of wind and water. The silence was profound, broken only by the rumble of the engine and the occasional cry of a hawk overhead. After several hours, a faint outline began to emerge on the horizon, the skeletal remains of what was once a town. Crumbling stone foundations, the ghosts of wooden structures, and a single, towering brick chimney, standing like a monument to a forgotten industry. Oakhaven. It was more desolate than Elias had imagined, a poignant reminder of human impermanence. He parked the truck at the edge of what must have been the main street, the tires crunching on broken glass and sun-bleached debris. Ghost was out of the truck before Elias had even killed the engine, his nose to the ground, his tail held high, a low, inquisitive whine rumbling in his chest. The air hung heavy with the scent of dust, decay, and something else, something metallic and faintly acrid, a smell that prickled at Elias's military-trained senses. He pulled out the old map he'd found online, a hand-drawn sketch from the 1940s, and began to orient himself. The mill, a sprawling complex of collapsed buildings and rusting machinery, dominated the landscape. He walked slowly, carefully, his eyes scanning the ground for hazards, his ears attuned to the subtle shifts in the wind. Ghost moved ahead of him, weaving through the overgrown weeds and collapsed walls, a silent scout. He found Evelyn's house first, guided by the map and a faded, peeling mailbox. It was a small, two-room structure, its roof long gone, its walls reduced to crumbling adobe. Inside, a few broken pieces of furniture lay scattered, covered in dust and cobwebs. A rusted stove, a broken chair, the faint outline of a bed frame. He stood in what must have been the living room, trying to imagine Evelyn here, waiting for her soldier, her heart full of hope and dread. He felt a profound sadness, a connection to a life that had ended not with a bang, but with a quiet, inexplicable disappearance. Ghost suddenly stopped, his body rigid, his gaze fixed on a section of the collapsed wall. He let out a low, guttural growl, a sound that Elias had heard only in moments of extreme danger. Elias immediately tensed, his hand instinctively going to the worn leather holster at his hip. He carried a sidearm, a habit born of necessity and the lingering paranoia of combat. He scanned the area, seeing nothing but the desolate ruins. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, his voice low and steady. Ghost continued to growl, his hackles raised, his eyes fixed on a dark crevice in the wall. Elias approached cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. He peered into the crevice, seeing only shadow. But then, a faint glint, a flicker of light. He reached in, his fingers brushing against something smooth and metallic. He pulled it out, a small, cylindrical object, surprisingly heavy. It was a casing, a spent shell, but not from any weapon he recognized. It was larger, thicker, and bore strange, unfamiliar markings. His military training screamed danger. This wasn't just a ghost town. It was a place with a secret, a place where something had happened, something far more sinister than a simple disappearance. Ghost continued to growl, now pacing back and forth, his agitation palpable. He nudged Elias's hand, then turned and began to move towards the mill, his movements urgent and insistent. Elias followed, the strange casing clutched in his hand, a cold dread spreading through him. The metallic, acrid smell grew stronger as they approached the mill, mingling with the scent of decay. The mill itself was a labyrinth of rusting machinery, collapsed timbers, and dark, echoing spaces. Ghost led him to a section of the mill that seemed more intact, a large, windowless building that had withstood the ravages of time better than the others. The door, made of heavy steel, was ajar, hanging precariously on a single rusted hinge. As they stepped inside, the air grew thick and heavy, laden with the same acrid smell, now almost overpowering. Elias's eyes adjusted to the gloom, and what he saw sent a chill straight to his bones. This wasn't a mill. It was a laboratory, or what was left of one. Rows of broken beakers, corroded equipment, and discarded vials lay scattered across the floor. A faded blackboard still bore complex chemical equations, half erased. And in the center of the room, on a rusted metal table, was a collection of strange, spherical objects, about the size of a grapefruit, their surfaces a dull, unsettling gray. They looked like bombs. Primitive, but undeniably dangerous. Elias felt a sudden, sickening realization. Evelyn's secret, the strange illness, the abandoned town. It was all connected. And he, with Ghost by his side, had just stumbled into the heart of it. The desert, in its vast, silent indifference, had kept its secrets well, but now, those secrets were starting to unravel, and Elias knew, with a chilling certainty, that he had just stepped into a history far more dangerous and far-reaching than he could have ever imagined. The spherical objects on the table were not just old bombs. They were crude, unsettling prototypes, their very existence a testament to a dark chapter of forgotten history. Elias, his military instincts screaming, recognized the telltale signs of something illicit, something designed to inflict harm on a scale beyond conventional warfare. He pulled out his phone, the signal weak and intermittent, and tried to research the markings on the shell casing and the strange devices. Nothing. No public records, no historical accounts. It was as if this entire operation had been meticulously erased from existence. Ghost, meanwhile, was agitated, circling the room, his nose to the ground, his low growl a constant thrum. He stopped at a section of the wall, an area covered by a thick layer of dust and debris, and began to paw at it, his tail wagging with a renewed urgency. Elias, his attention momentarily diverted from the unsettling devices, knelt beside him. He noticed a faint seam in the wall, almost imperceptible, a clever camouflage. He pushed, and with a groan of protest, a hidden door swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow passage. A rush of cold, stale air, thick with the scent of earth and mildew, emanated from the passage. Elias, his senses on high alert, pulled out his tactical flashlight, its beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. "Stay close, boy," he murmured to Ghost, who was already pushing ahead, his powerful body moving with a silent determination. The passage sloped downwards, leading them into a subterranean labyrinth. The walls were rough-hewn rock, the air growing colder and heavier with each step. This wasn't just a storage area. It was a bunker, a place built to conceal, to protect. They emerged into a larger chamber, its ceiling supported by thick wooden beams, some of them rotting, others surprisingly intact. This chamber was clearly a more sophisticated laboratory, with more advanced equipment, though still decades old. Intact glass vials, their contents long evaporated, lined shelves. A rusted microscope sat on a workbench, its lenses clouded with age. And then he saw it. A series of large, metal canisters, their surfaces emblazoned with a familiar symbol, the skull and crossbones, a universal sign of danger. But beneath it, a stylized, almost elegant insignia, a crest that bore a striking resemblance to a corporate logo he'd seen recently, albeit in a different context. A cold dread settled over him. He approached the canisters cautiously, his flashlight beam playing over their surfaces. They were sealed, but the faint, acrid smell was stronger here, almost stinging his nostrils. He recognized the design, the chilling efficiency of it. These were storage containers for biological or chemical agents. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Evelyn's letters, the burden she carried, the strange illness in Oakhaven. It wasn't just a missing person case. It was a cover-up, a horrifying experiment, a crime against humanity hidden beneath the sands of time. And the soldier? He must have been involved, a witness, or perhaps a victim. Ghost, who had been sniffing around the canisters, suddenly let out a sharp bark, then began to dig frantically at a section of the dirt floor. Elias rushed over, his heart pounding. The dog was unearthing something metallic. Elias helped him, digging with his hands, the dirt cold and damp. He pulled it free, a small, waterproof container, its surface surprisingly clean. Inside, he found a bundle of letters, sealed in plastic. But these weren't the soldier's letters. These were Evelyn's. He tore open the plastic, his fingers trembling with anticipation. Evelyn's elegant handwriting filled the pages, her words a desperate plea, a confession. She wrote of her love for the soldier, a brilliant but troubled scientist named Arthur, who had been coerced into working for a clandestine government project during the war. A project to develop a new kind of weapon, a biological agent, tested right here, in Oakhaven, under the guise of the mill. She wrote of the escalating sickness in the town, the unexplained deaths, and her growing horror as she realized the true nature of Arthur's work. She mentioned a Dr. Alistair Finch, the project director, a man of ruthless ambition and chilling indifference. The corporate logo, the one Elias had recognized, was the symbol of Finch's family company, a powerful conglomerate that had diversified into everything from pharmaceuticals to defense contracting. Evelyn wrote of Arthur's guilt, his desperate attempts to sabotage the project, to expose Finch. She spoke of his plan to hide the evidence, to create a failsafe, a way to reveal the truth if anything happened to them. The final letter, dated the day she disappeared, spoke of her fear, her knowledge that Finch was closing in, that Arthur had been silenced. She begged anyone who found her letters to expose Finch, to bring justice to Oakhaven. The last line was smudged, a single tear stain marring the elegant script. Tell my story. Tell Arthur's story. Don't let them be forgotten. Elias stood in the oppressive silence of the bunker, the weight of Evelyn's words settling heavy on his soul. He looked at the canisters, then at the faded corporate logo, a symbol of power and corruption that had endured for decades. This wasn't just a historical discovery, it was a living, breathing threat. The canisters contained a deadly legacy, a silent killer waiting to be unleashed. And Finch, or his descendants, were still out there, still powerful, still dangerous. He had stumbled into a web of deceit and corporate malfeasance that stretched back generations, a secret that powerful people would kill to keep buried. And now, he and Lily, and Ghost, were in the crosshairs. The quiet life he had sought in the desert had been shattered, replaced by a chilling realization. He was no longer just a veteran seeking peace. He was a guardian of a terrible truth and a target. The desert, in its vast, indifferent beauty, had revealed a monster, and Elias knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he would have to fight. The drive back from Oakhaven was a blur of dust and grim determination. Elias felt a cold anger simmering beneath his calm exterior, a rage born of injustice and the quiet suffering of Evelyn and Arthur. He had Evelyn's letters, her desperate plea for justice, and the chilling evidence of Finch's corporate malfeasance. He also had the coordinates of the hidden bunker, a place that held not just historical secrets, but a very real and present danger. He knew he couldn't go to the local authorities. Finch's reach would be too long, his influence too pervasive. He needed to find someone outside the system, someone who could help him expose the truth. He thought of the old soldiers' network, the quiet, unofficial channels of veterans who had seen too much, knew too much, and were willing to fight for what was right, even when the odds were stacked against them. He knew a few names, men and women he had served with, people who understood the meaning of loyalty and the cost of silence. He pulled out his satellite phone, the expensive, encrypted device he'd kept from his military days, and began to make calls. The desert, stretching endlessly around him, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a battleground. Ghost, sensing the shift in Elias's mood, sat silently beside him, occasionally resting his head on Elias's lap, a comforting weight. His presence was a steady anchor in the turbulent sea of Elias's thoughts. Lily, when he picked her up from Maria's, sensed the change in him. Her bright eyes searched his face, a silent question in their depths. He simply hugged her tighter, a silent promise to protect her, no matter the cost. He wouldn't tell her the full truth yet, not about the horrors hidden in Oakhaven, but he would make sure she was safe. Over the next few days, Elias worked tirelessly, contacting his network, gathering information, piecing together the modern-day empire of the Finch Corporation. It was a sprawling conglomerate, its tendrils reaching into every sector of industry, its public image pristine, its power immense. Dr. Alistair Finch, the architect of Oakhaven's tragedy, was long dead, but his legacy lived on through his son, Julian Finch, a ruthless CEO who had expanded the family empire with aggressive acquisitions and a reputation for crushing any opposition. Elias found articles hinting at questionable environmental practices, silenced whistleblowers, and a pervasive culture of fear within the company. He also discovered that the land around Oakhaven, including the abandoned mill, had been quietly acquired by a shell company linked to Finch Corporation in recent years. This wasn't a coincidence. They knew about the bunker, about the hidden weapons. They were likely planning to retrieve them, to exploit them, or perhaps to simply erase them forever. The stakes were higher than he had imagined. One evening, as Elias was poring over documents, Ghost suddenly became agitated. He stood by the window, his ears perked, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Elias looked up, his hand instinctively going to his sidearm. He saw nothing but the vast, empty desert, illuminated by the pale light of the moon. But Ghost's senses were sharper, more attuned to the subtle vibrations of the land. Then he heard it, the faint, almost imperceptible hum of an engine, growing steadily louder. Not a truck, something else, something sleek, fast, and silent. He grabbed Lily, who was asleep on the couch, and motioned for Ghost to follow. "Get to the storm cellar," he whispered, pushing Lily towards the hidden entrance beneath the kitchen floor. He had reinforced it himself, a habit from his military days, always preparing for the worst. He watched from the window as a black, unmarked SUV, its windows tinted, pulled up to the house. Two men, dressed in dark tactical gear, emerged. They moved with a professional precision that sent a shiver down Elias's spine. These weren't local thugs. These were trained operatives. Finch had sent his cleanup crew. They knew. They had been watching him. Elias positioned himself in the doorway, his weapon drawn, Ghost a silent, menacing presence by his side. "Who are you?" Elias called out, his voice steady, betraying none of the fear that was coiling in his gut. One of the men, a tall, imposing figure with a cold, unyielding gaze, stepped forward. "Mr. Vance, we just want to talk about what you found in Oakhaven." His voice was calm, almost polite, but there was an unmistakable threat in his tone. "You mean what your company left in Oakhaven?" Elias retorted, his grip tightening on his weapon. "Evelyn Thompson's story, Arthur's story, and the bioweapons your family created." The man's eyes narrowed. "That's ancient history, Mr. Vance. And it's not your concern. Hand over the documents. Tell us the location of the bunker, and you and your daughter can walk away." Elias scoffed. "You think I'm that stupid? You think I'd trust a man who works for a company built on lies and murder?" The man's face hardened. "You leave us no choice, Mr. Vance." He raised a hand, and the second operative, who had been circling around the side of the house, leveled his weapon. Elias knew this was it. The moment he had dreaded. The moment he had unconsciously been preparing for since he'd first opened that rusted box. He glanced at Ghost, who was tensed, ready to spring. He thought of Lily, safe in the cellar, and a surge of protective fury coursed through him. He would not let them win. He would not let Evelyn's story die in the desert. He would not let Finch's legacy of death continue. The quiet life he had sought was gone, replaced by the familiar, brutal clarity of combat. And as the first shot rang out, shattering the silence of the desert night, Elias Vance, the wounded warrior, became the protector, his purpose forged in the crucible of a forgotten past and a dangerous present. The initial volley of gunfire tore through the flimsy walls of the house, splintering wood and sending plaster dust raining down. Elias, a blur of motion, dove for cover behind a heavy, overturned table, Ghost a shadow at his heels. The familiar scent of cordite filled the air, a chilling echo of distant battlefields. His military training, dormant for years, surged to the forefront, every instinct honed by years of combat taking over. He returned fire, aiming for center mass, the precision of his shots a testament to his unwavering skill. The two operatives were good, moving with a disciplined efficiency that spoke of professional training. They were clearly not expecting such fierce resistance from a lone man in a dilapidated house. Elias knew he couldn't outgun them in a direct firefight. He needed to use the environment, the darkness, and the element of surprise. He was on his home turf, however temporary, and he knew every creak, every shadow, every advantage this desolate place offered. Ghost, a silent, deadly force, moved with an almost supernatural grace. He flanked one of the operatives, a low growl rumbling in his chest, then sprang, his powerful jaws closing around the man's arm. The operative screamed, dropping his weapon, his focus momentarily shattered. Elias seized the opportunity, firing a precise shot that incapacitated the man. The other operative, momentarily distracted, turned his attention to Ghost, but Elias was already moving, flowing through the shadows, a ghost himself. He engaged the second operative in a brutal, close-quarters struggle. The man was strong, but Elias was fueled by a fierce, protective rage. He disarmed him, the clang of metal against metal echoing in the night, and brought him down with a swift, decisive blow. He bound the two men with zip ties he kept in his emergency kit, a habit born of combat experience. He searched them, finding encrypted satellite phones, high-tech tracking devices, and a chilling array of specialized weapons. They were not just enforcers, they were highly trained assassins. As the immediate threat subsided, Elias took a moment to breathe, his heart still pounding, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He checked on Ghost, who, despite a few scrapes, was unharmed, his intelligent eyes gleaming in the dim light. Then, he checked on Lily, gently opening the storm cellar door. She emerged, her face pale but resolute, clutching her worn sketchbook. "Are they gone, Daddy?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "They're dealt with, sweetie," he reassured her, pulling her into a tight hug. "You're safe." He knew this was just the beginning. Finch Corporation would send more. They would not give up their secrets easily. He needed to move, and he needed to expose the truth before they could silence him permanently. He had Evelyn's letters, Arthur's tragic story, and the coordinates of the bunker. He had the proof. But he needed a bigger platform, a way to reach the world, to force Finch's hand. He used the operative's encrypted phones, hoping to find a direct line to Julian Finch. He found a secure channel, a direct connection to Finch's personal assistant. He sent a terse message, a declaration of war. "I have the truth about Oakhaven. Evelyn Thompson. Arthur. Your father's legacy. I have the proof. And I'm going to make sure the world knows." He included a coded reference to the bunker's location, a detail only Finch would understand. He knew this was a dangerous gamble, a direct challenge to a powerful, ruthless adversary. But he had no other choice. He couldn't hide forever, and he wouldn't let Evelyn's story be buried again. He packed what little they had, loading it into the pickup truck. He had to leave the abandoned house, their temporary sanctuary, their fragile new beginning. But he would come back for it, once this was over. As the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky in hues of rose and gold, Elias, Lily, and Ghost drove away from the dilapidated house, leaving behind the shattered windows and bullet-riddled walls. The desert, vast and indifferent, stretched before them, a canvas for their uncertain future. Elias knew they were now on the run, hunted by a powerful corporation, their lives in constant danger. But he also felt a strange sense of clarity, a renewed purpose. He was no longer just a wounded veteran, haunted by his past. He was a protector, a truth seeker, a man fighting for justice, for Evelyn, for Arthur, and for his daughter. He had connected with his old military network, a clandestine group of veterans who specialized in intelligence gathering and exposing corporate malfeasance. They were already working on a plan, a strategy to leak the information, to bring the full weight of public scrutiny down on Finch Corporation. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was their only hope. And as the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the desert, Elias knew that the fight had truly begun. He had found not just a box of old letters, but a cause, a reason to fight, to live, to finally heal. And with Ghost by his side, a silent, unwavering guardian, he would see it through, no matter the cost. The next few weeks were a blur of clandestine meetings, encrypted communications, and constant vigilance. Elias, Lily, and Ghost moved from one safe house to another, relying on the generosity and quiet defiance of his veteran network. These were men and women who understood the meaning of loyalty, the burden of truth, and the quiet courage it took to stand against overwhelming power. They provided him with resources, intelligence, and most importantly, a sense of solidarity that had been missing from his life for too long. The story of Oakhaven, of Evelyn and Arthur, and the chilling legacy of Finch Corporation began to spread through the unofficial channels, whispers turning into murmurs, then into a growing roar. Elias's network meticulously compiled the evidence. Evelyn's letters, the coordinates of the bunker, the spent shell casing, and the chilling photographs he had taken of the bioweapons. They cross-referenced it with decades of Finch Corporation's shady dealings, the silenced whistleblowers, the environmental disasters, the quiet disappearances. The picture that emerged was one of a ruthless, immoral empire built on a foundation of lies and a chilling disregard for human life. Julian Finch, the CEO, was initially dismissive, issuing stern denials and threatening legal action against anyone who dared to spread malicious falsehoods. But the evidence was too compelling, the whispers too loud to ignore. A small, independent investigative journalism team, known for their tenacity and fearlessness, picked up the story. They were a motley crew of exiled reporters and disillusioned former intelligence officers, operating outside the mainstream, their only allegiance to the truth. Elias made contact with them, providing them with the full extent of his findings, including the location of the Oakhaven bunker. The journalists, led by a formidable woman named Sarah Chun, understood the risks. They knew Finch's reach, his willingness to eliminate any threat to his empire. But they also recognized the profound importance of the story. It wasn't just about a forgotten town. It was about corporate accountability, about the dark underbelly of power, and about the quiet heroes who dared to expose it. While the journalists prepared their exposé, Elias knew Finch would not stand idly by. The attacks escalated. Not just operatives, but private security forces, their movements precise, their intent deadly. Elias, with Ghost as his unwavering sentinel, became a master of evasion, a phantom in the vast wilderness of the American Southwest. He taught Lily basic survival skills, how to read a map, how to move silently, how to trust her instincts. She, in turn, found a quiet strength, her fears slowly giving way to a fierce determination, a reflection of her father's own resilience. Ghost was invaluable. His senses, sharper than any human's, often detected threats long before they materialized. A subtle shift in the wind, a distant vibration in the earth, a faint, almost imperceptible scent. Ghost would alert Elias, his low growl or urgent nudge providing the precious seconds they needed to evade capture. He was more than a dog. He was a partner, a guardian angel, his loyalty an unshakable force in a world of shifting allegiances. One night, while holed up in a remote, abandoned mining cabin, Ghost became intensely agitated. He paced by the single window, his hackles raised, a deep, guttural growl rumbling in his chest. Elias knew. This wasn't just a perimeter breach. This was a coordinated assault. He grabbed Lily, who was already awake, her eyes wide with a quiet understanding. "Stay low, sweetie," he whispered, pulling his weapon. Outside, the familiar hum of engines grew louder, closer. This time, there were more of them. Several vehicles, their headlights cutting through the inky blackness. Finch was bringing the full weight of his resources to bear. Elias knew he couldn't fight them all. He had to buy time. Time for the journalists to release their story, time for the truth to break through. He had a plan, a desperate, dangerous gamble. He had planted a series of small, strategically placed explosives around the cabin, a contingency he had prepared for. Not to kill, but to create chaos, to buy precious moments. He hugged Lily tightly. "I need you to be brave, okay? I'm going to create a diversion. You and Ghost go out the back, through the old tunnel. Don't stop. Don't look back. Meet me at the rendezvous point." He pointed to a distant mesa, a landmark they had memorized. Lily, her small face determined, nodded. "I will, Daddy." "Be careful," she hugged Ghost. Then, with a silent understanding, the dog nudged her towards the hidden exit, a narrow crack in the back of the cabin that led to an old, forgotten mine shaft. As the first operatives breached the front door, Elias triggered the explosives. The cabin erupted in a series of concussive blasts, dust and debris filling the air, screams of surprise and confusion echoing in the night. Elias, a phantom in the chaos, slipped out the back, making his way through the familiar terrain, a silent promise to Lily and Ghost burning in his heart. He would lead the chase, draw them away, buy them the time they needed. He was a lone wolf now, but he was fighting for something bigger than himself. He was fighting for justice, for a forgotten past, and for a future where his daughter could finally be safe. The desert, once a sanctuary, was now his battlefield, and Elias, the wounded warrior, was ready to make his final stand. The explosions ripped through the desert night, a symphony of chaos and destruction that Elias orchestrated with chilling precision. He moved like a shadow, drawing the bulk of Finch's forces after him, a lone decoy against a relentless pursuit. His heart ached for Lily and Ghost, but he trusted them, trusted the instincts he had painstakingly instilled in his daughter, and the unwavering loyalty of his dog. He knew they would reach the rendezvous point. He had to believe it. He led the operatives on a winding chase through the treacherous terrain, using every trick he had learned in the desolate mountains of Afghanistan. False trails, hidden defilades, the deceptive echoes of the canyons. He turned the desert into his weapon, buying precious minutes, hours, for the truth to emerge. He was wounded, a bullet grazing his shoulder, but the pain was a distant thrum, overshadowed by the burning resolve in his soul. Meanwhile, Sarah Chun and her team, emboldened by Elias's sacrifice, had launched their exposé. The story of Oakhaven, the bioweapons, Evelyn and Arthur's tragic love, and Finch Corporation's decades-long cover-up hit the global news wires like a bombshell. They released Evelyn's letters, the photographs of the bunker, and the damning evidence of Finch's corporate malfeasance, meticulously cross-referenced with official documents and whistleblower testimonies. The world reacted with a mixture of shock, outrage, and disbelief. The impact was immediate and devastating. Julian Finch, caught completely off guard, tried to contain the damage, issuing furious denials, threatening lawsuits, and attempting to discredit the journalists. But it was too late. The truth, once unleashed, could not be put back in the box. Governments around the world launched investigations. Stock prices plummeted. Public outcry reached a fever pitch. Finch Corporation, once an untouchable empire, began to crumble under the weight of its own dark secrets. Elias, exhausted and bleeding, watched the news unfold on a small, battered radio he carried, hidden in a remote cave. He heard Sarah Chen's calm, authoritative voice, recounting the story, giving voice to Evelyn and Arthur, to the forgotten victims of Oakhaven. He heard the public's outrage, the calls for justice. A quiet satisfaction, a profound sense of peace, settled over him. He had done it. He had kept his promise. He made his way to the rendezvous point, his body aching, his movements slow and deliberate. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, a fitting end to a long, brutal day. He saw them then, small figures silhouetted against the horizon, Lily and Ghost. They were waiting for him, their forms a beacon of hope in the vast, indifferent landscape. He stumbled towards them, and Lily ran into his arms, her small body trembling. "Daddy," she cried, tears streaming down her face. Ghost, whimpering with relief, nudged his hand, then licked his face, his tail wagging furiously. Elias sank to the ground, pulling them both close, feeling their warmth, their unwavering love. "We did it, sweetie," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "We did it." In the aftermath, Julian Finch was arrested, facing a litany of charges ranging from corporate malfeasance to obstruction of justice and, eventually, murder. The Oakhaven bunker was secured by international authorities, the bioweapons safely neutralized, a chilling reminder of a dark past. The abandoned house, Elias's last $750 gamble, became a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of truth and the quiet heroism of a man and his dog. Elias and Lily, with Ghost by their side, returned to the house. It was battered, scarred, but it was still theirs. The Veteran Network, now a more formalized organization dedicated to exposing corporate corruption, offered Elias a position, a chance to use his unique skills for good. He accepted, but only after ensuring he could work remotely, from the quiet solitude of his desert home. He rebuilt the house, piece by piece, Lily helping him, their laughter echoing in the newly repaired rooms. It became a home, a sanctuary, a place of healing and new beginnings. The story of Evelyn and Arthur was finally told, their names etched into history, a testament to love and sacrifice in the face of unspeakable evil. Elias often visited Evelyn's grave, a simple marker in the overgrown cemetery of Oakhaven, now being restored by a small, dedicated group of volunteers. He would sit there, ghost by his side, telling her story, ensuring she was never forgotten. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert in hues of gold and crimson, Elias sat on his porch, Lily nestled beside him, Ghost resting his head on Elias's lap. The wind whispered through the junipers, a gentle, soothing sound. He looked at Lily, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the setting sun, then at Ghost, his loyal, unwavering companion. He had found more than just a house. He had found a purpose, a family, and a profound sense of peace. The wounds of his past had not entirely healed, but they were no longer gaping. They were scars, reminders of battles fought and won, of a journey from isolation to connection, from despair to hope. And as he watched the stars begin to emerge in the vast, inky canvas of the desert sky, Elias knew, with a quiet certainty, that their story, the story of a man, a girl, and a dog, was only just beginning.